Well, welcome to our conversations about church membership. This is part of our strategy that we're exploring this year that you may remember from our meetings. And I am joined by the rest of the ministry team, Simon to my left hand and Peter to my right. Many of you know us very well, so this feels a bit strange introducing them in that manner. But for those that don't, we're here to have a conversation around membership. And over the coming months, we're going to explore different questions to open this conversation up. Today's question is, why do we have membership? And it's a chance for us to explore the bigger picture, maybe look at some of the history, look at what the Bible has to say about membership. And then we can dig down to some of the details in the coming months as we look at who can be a member, exploring expectations and responsibilities of a member, and then what could membership look like at South Street Baptist Church? So there's plenty of questions to ask, but for now we come to our first question: why do we have membership? And as we were talking about this previously during the week, we thought it helpful to maybe split this into three sections: to look at commitment, to look at discernment, and to look at governance. So, thinking about commitment, there's certainly Bible passages that speak to our being the church as a form of commitment to one another and to God's mission. Maybe we could look at some of those.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Maybe 1 Corinthians 12, first Peter, what do you think?
Yes, 1 Corinthians 12 is probably the passage that very many people would look at as a guide to what it means to be committed to one another. And within chapter 12, verses 12 to 27 are crucial. And within that, we'd want to draw attention, I think, to one verse above all, which is verse 27. Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. Although membership as a word is not really a biblical word, here you have the sense that together, individually, we are part of this body, and we need each other, and we need to be, to one another.
We did the membership course this week, and that passage was one of the ones we focused on, and that metaphor in particular. And I think one of the things we were all drawn to is the fact that everyone has a part to play in the body. That no matter what you deem, how well you deem your role, it's important. And I think that the line that we were using is that actually we can't be our fullest, we can't be a fully functioning body unless everyone uses their gifts, no matter how small they may seem those gifts to be. They're vital for us functioning in wholeness. Mm-hmm.
Indeed, we probably want to say, take time to look at those 16 verses or so on your own, and how that indeed is shown so clearly.
And there's things here in this passage, if you were looking at it and joining, whether you're listening or watching this time together, there's aspects about supporting even the weakest member, that if someone is struggling, we are to gather around them and to help them do their role in order that we can keep functioning. It's a really beautiful passage with so much within that metaphor. But again, commitment, I suppose, lying at the heart of a lot of what is said, that we are committed to one another. There's also the important passage, Simon maybe wants to read through in Acts 2.
Yeah, it's a passage that will be familiar to a lot of folks in the church at the moment, because it's the passage that the Holy Habits discipleship series is based on. And it says this: they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And it goes on for a few more verses describing the ways in which they had fellowship with each other, the way that they looked out for each other, shared their possessions, ate together, worshipped together. But it's a reminder that from the earliest days, to be a Christian is to be in community. And I think too often these days we individualise the Christian faith. It's all about me and my relationship with God. where very much we see Jesus calls to himself a community of people. And then the early church from the beginning, again, is a community. People who gather together and express their commitment to Jesus through their commitment to each other.
I suppose you could have probably used the word community, couldn't we, even instead of commitment. I mean, the two are so closely intertwined, aren't they? That sense of to be a community, you have to commit to one another.
Yeah, I think so. And as Peter has rightly pointed out, the New Testament does not formally talk about a system of membership, and different churches will work this out in different ways. There's no one pattern. But for us as Baptists, we saw membership as the way of expressing this sense of community, this sense of communion, we might say. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's a passage I was always drawn to in the Baptist Basics book that we have out of that ancient pack. I think it's by Nigel Wright. Was he the one that...
He wrote some of it. I don't think he did do all of it, but he did some of it.
Yeah. It's going back over 20 years now, well over 20 years.
When I was just a little whippersnapper with full head of hair. And in this Baptist Basic, there's a beautiful kind of comparison between membership and marriage. And again, just one of the many metaphors that we could use. But it says, just as marriage is designed to be a firm commitment which strengthens and supports a loving relationship between two people, so church membership is designed to be a foundation for strengthening the relationships within a congregation. When people commit themselves to a church in membership, they are strengthening the inner life of the church in a way that will make it more effective in its mission. I like that, I think, because much like we've described at the moment, marriage, as much as it is beautiful, is tough. Community, as much as it is beautiful, is difficult, and all require that level of commitment, that you commit to each other through the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think it seems to be expressed in I don't mean that's just what marriage is like, but you know what I mean. There's something of the commitment to one another and the commitment to each other that you find in that particular metaphor.
Yeah. It's about a relationship that is more serious, isn't it? So membership is like marriage is a serious commitment for life. We're saying that membership should also be a very serious commitment that means a lot to us and probably costs us something as well, as well as bringing a great deal of joy, we hope.
Yeah. That's important. And potentially one of the reasons some people have been put off becoming members.
Perhaps, perhaps. Be interesting to hear people's reflections on that.
Yeah, what that means today. I don't know how much of it's really a word that translates particularly well in modern culture, because we think instantly, don't we, of gym memberships. And, you pay a certain amount of money, you get this in return, but actually, like you said, we talk of giving as much as we receive in membership, and I think that's quite a radical concept.
And our forefathers may have chosen to use the word covenant as a way of describing this relationship. For us these days, covenant is a word that we don't bandy about a great deal, but yet the idea of an agreement which cannot be easily broken is something which perhaps membership does imply, even to this day.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, when we went through the papers of Maureen Sleeman, who will be known to some, we found the papers for the AGM from 1957. So that's going back further than we probably want to think now. But what was really interesting was it seems that when they had the annual meeting, the whole membership gathered at the church meeting, the annual meeting, or on other occasions, would repeat a covenant that the church had agreed and that they shared with each other, which we've got here, which we can let people see if they want to. The wording is slightly old-fashioned. We probably want to change it if we use something like this now. But I guess today, perhaps, an annual meeting has been a time when we have to do formal stuff. But it's interesting that even back in the 1950s, they saw it as a time to actually renew their relationship to Christ and their relationship to each other as part of that meeting. So.
And interesting how you never do anything new, do you? Because we've talked about whether that's even something we'd want to do in the future for how we begin to bring unity amongst diverse gatherings, that we have a covenant that we annually share in. Yeah. Wonderful that it's so anchored in history and the way the traditions of the church.
Yeah.
So commitment is key to membership, to one another and to God's mission. And we also, when we were discussing this, talked about the idea of discernment, and particularly discerning the mind of Christ. And Peter, you were saying this is something you're particularly passionate about as we come, sorry to put you on the spot, but as we come together in members' meetings, discerning the mind of Christ is something you're passionate about.
If we wanted to take one passage that might illustrate this to a considerable degree, it would be the beginning of Acts 13, the first few verses of that, which I will not read at this point. But as the church was gathered together, so they believed God was speaking to them at that point, and a big decision was made as to the future direction of the Christian community. And so we talk about discerning the mind of Christ. Can I go on a bit about that for a moment? How do we actually do that? It may trip off the tongue of those of us of a certain age, but what does it involve to seek to discern the mind of Christ? I'm sure we'd all agree that meetings of members are bathed in prayer. We begin with prayer. We may pause for prayer. We will end with prayer. And it is something that should be integral to what we do together when we are seeking to discern the mind of Christ. It will probably be involved for us a seeking at times what Scripture might say. We might have considered that before we get to the meeting point of view. It will certainly include listening to each other, not just listening to one person giving their views from the front, but at the point of a members' meeting is where we listen to each other, believing that if we are discerning the mind of Christ, we all may have something that we can bring to that discussion. It probably should mean that we listen to the reflections of others. In our case, perhaps because we're a Baptist church, we might want to weigh up what others who've gone before us and others who are our leaders today have to say about matters of real significance. And it may sometimes mean that to fully discern the mind of Christ, we take on board too the issues that we are considering and relate them to what we are doing on Sundays, where the person who is preaching may need sometimes to help to guide us into the thinking that we make. But all those would be part of seeking to discern the mind of Christ. It's not something that we just do spontaneously on our own.
Because you're right, I mean, it's certainly a term we bandy around a lot. But,
we do.
But actually the reality of it is difficult to it's easy to say, isn't it, but difficult
Yes.
to actually do. I think one of the things that we were talking about, again, to draw in the membership course the other day, was the idea that it genuinely gives voice to everyone. And I know it's not just about democracy in the sense that you all put your hand up and say, you want this or you want that, but it's a person I used to know described it in the way that you put your hands up rather than saying I want this, I want that. It's God, what do you want, with both hands. And I think there's a sense in which every member has the opportunity to contribute what they believe God is saying to them, maybe as an individual, but also as a community. And I love how empowering that is. And we were saying in this membership course that actually it really is empowering, because someone can put their hand up who might think that they don't have a massive part to play in the church, contribute a thought, and we've both seen, haven't we, members' meetings where the whole meeting is shifted as a consequence of that idea, or as a consequence, it's not a small thing, and you're genuinely heard. I think in a political system that we're used to at the moment, where we're frustrated that it doesn't feel that voices are being heard and your vote really matters, it really does in a membership meeting. I think that's a wonderful thing, that discernment.
I think it's brilliant, and I remember that I first became a member of a Baptist church when I was about 18 or 19, And I was kind of used to much more kind of authoritarian hierarchical structures. And I do remember that one of the things that really excited me about it, I mean genuinely excited me about it, was the fact that for me as a young person, my voice could count. And it could be me through whom Christ speaks to the meeting. And I think, we need to just reiterate that our hope is that it is Christ. It's Christ that we're wanting to make known. And so we hope that when we speak in a meeting, we're seeking to reflect what we think Christ might be saying. But that doesn't mean we need to know absolutely, because we're discerning. So we're journeying together. We don't necessarily have all the answers. But I can remember as a young person being really excited that actually I could come to this meeting and I would be heard, and God might use me in that meeting.
I think I can look back to odd occasions in the past where we've barely needed to take a vote on something because it's been so very clear as we've listened to each other the direction in which we should go.
Yeah, it's always exciting when that happens. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And there is something, isn't there, about in those members' meetings that we come together not just to do business, but as you said, there is that spiritual matter, and there's a degree, I feel, of wrestling with, I was about to say wrestling with one another, which sounds strange, but you know what I mean, in the sense of debating in a healthy manner and in a respectful manner. I remember in past meetings we've had where things have gone really badly, and there was one person in particular got up and swore at everyone in the membership and walked out. And we all thought, oh my goodness, I can't believe it's got to this state. They went away and there was a change in the room. You could feel a warmth in the room. Yeah. There was something that happened that it's hard to articulate. But when they came back in, they just looked at everyone else and just put their hands up and said, I'm sorry. And they were welcomed back into the room with a round of applause. And the meeting shifted because there was something about being brought together in that moment. There was something of God's Spirit working in that really difficult, taut, intention kind of moment. It's real, isn't it? Because it's real people dealing with real issues, seeking to discern God's mind, Christ's mind. And finally, we mentioned the most exciting, I'm sure, is the reason everyone wants to become a member, but is governance of us, obviously, as being a charity, as a Baptist church. I remember when I talked to people about this topic, about how we govern ourselves and our makeup. It is strange, isn't it? Particularly if you've not come from the Baptist denomination, if you've come from Anglican or other denominations. The fact that we are a charity, and we're a charity within charities, that you've got the Southwest Baptist Association as a charity, and the umbrella for the Baptist Union is a charity, is a strange aspect of what it means to be a member, I suppose. Simon, in our conversations you were talking about, I suppose your how you've seen some of this historically change over the years. Maybe you haven't seen.
No, I haven't. We'd have to go back a few hundred years, and I don't quite go back a few hundred years, almost, but not quite.
Even me. No.
But it is interesting because I have to be honest, I don't know at which point Baptists actually started to use the word membership. I suspect it's relatively modern. Because originally, when we started in the 17th century, they would have used the word in covenant. So they would have rather said that they were in covenant with each other. And because we saw the church as being a gathered congregation of Christian believers, was how we saw the church, they had an issue of, well, how do we make sure that everyone who's in the church actually is a Christian? Because if they're going to share in making decisions, we need to know that obviously they're coming with the right motives and the right understanding and the right faith. And so the way that many of them did it was to have a covenant where they would express their commitment to Christ, first of all, and then their commitment to each other. So that sense of you belong to Christ by belonging to the local church, and they would make that commitment that they would walk together in ways that they knew and ways yet to be made known. How much governance they did in the early days, I'm not sure. But certainly things like calling ministers and maybe appointing deacons and things like that. But as we know, with early church meetings, much more of it would have been to do with church discipline. And I suspect if we look back in the records, we'd be quite shocked by the kind of level of detail. And, you know, so-and-so was seen out drinking on a Saturday night. We brought them out in front of the church meeting and we disciplined them. So I suspect that's the kind of thing that would have happened. You know, so-and-so was seen doing something that they thought was disreputable. You know, these days we might say, well, perhaps not. And that's largely what church meetings would have been to do with, which I think we would now struggle with, except in extreme cases. But now we have these beautiful buildings. We have health and safety responsibilities, other legal responsibilities, and part of membership is sharing in those responsibilities. So sharing in the governance of the church, which I don't know how much that might put people off these days.
Well, I obviously can't speak for all of my generation, but I certainly found that when I originally started going to membership meetings, it was the thing I looked least forward to. And I love the idea of discerning. I love the bigger picture, the vision stuff that we discussed in those meetings, but always found that I just switched off when it came to anything governance-based. But I have found in a few years of being in members' meetings, I started to adjust my way of thinking and actually saw the real benefit, I think, in those details, because they really helped us do the stuff we wanted to do. You know, the importance of conversations around the architecture of the space may have sounded boring at the time, but yet it was so important to how we offered a welcome to people, how we worshipped together, because architecture spoke volumes to that. So I've personally found that for me, governance has become more interesting, and maybe I'm just getting old. I'm 35 in a couple of weeks. I refuse to call myself old. So maybe, but I just find that over time... I'm maturing. You're maturing. Maybe I've matured, I don't know. I just certainly found that those details weren't quite as sleep-inducing as they were actually quite interesting, because they need to be done to help us do this exciting missional stuff.
I think so. I think, and I know this is a subject that we're going to deal with later on, there is a huge challenge facing us now, because, obviously, things to do with the formal running of the charity, looking after the buildings, there are things like that we have to do. And perhaps we've shifted a bit too much to church meetings now being more issues-based. And perhaps we need to look again about actually where do we do the relating, because a covenant actually is a relationship. That's all covenant means. It's a serious relationship. So actually, how can church meetings also help us deepen our relationship with each other and deepen our relationship with Christ? So I'm looking forward to having the conversation where we talk about actually what is the church meeting for.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
I haven't got much to add to this particular one. I understand exactly what you were saying earlier, even at my more advanced years. It's the governance things can be incredibly difficult, but they are important. And I think for us, with the nature of Baptist churches, where our leadership, even at ministerial level, is entirely governed by the church and is not imposed from an authority above, that need for governance becomes even more critical.
And I know we're going to think about responsibilities of church membership, but we would say actually that is a key responsibility of church membership, to share in the setting the direction of the church and seeking to know Christ's vision for our life together.
There is a real responsibility there, isn't there? And I think it was actually in past churches there was a worry about that. People came from a more brethren tradition, because they wanted a more exclusive view of membership, because they saw almost membership as leadership, in the sense that the decisions were made amongst the members for the church. I don't think that's a helpful term to use necessarily when we're talking about members. But it was interesting, because they saw the importance of the membership and the direction of the church, that therefore they saw it as a form of leadership. Which I suppose now I say it, there's probably truth to that.
I'm sure you're right, and I think there are not many denominations which do have this bottom-up structure.
No.
Very, very few. And so people coming in from outside probably find this is a really significant issue to deal with.
Yeah. I can remember talking to someone who was going into the ordained ministry of another church, which had a much more hierarchical structure, and had toyed with the idea of going into Baptist ministry, and it was a time when I was looking to go into ministry, and so we chatted about why he'd made the decision he had. And he was very honest, was that he didn't like Baptist ways of governing churches, that he thought including the membership really slowed down making decisions, and he felt that actually what the Church of Christ needed was that kind of directed leadership from the top. And okay, sometimes that can be incredibly successful, but also sometimes it can be incredibly damaging and dangerous. And what I love about our model of church government is we are seeking to share together in being who Christ wants us to be, in the place where Christ has put us, which I think is a really exciting thing. Sometimes it may take us a bit longer to get there, but hopefully we all get there together.
I have a feeling, reflecting on this in recent years, that the kind of top-down structure that you're talking about there may have been appropriate for an immature church which has just been recently founded, but does not work for a church where people are growing in the faith.
Wonderful. Well, we hope this time has been helpful for you. If you've been listening or watching this on YouTube, the aim was not to give you prescriptive answers as much to open up the conversation to you, to go away, to look at some of the passages, to listen to this, to think through what we've said. And then when we come to our next members meeting, we'll have an opportunity to discuss some of these things together in that context and put into practice really some of the things that we've been talking about in our time together. So thank you for joining us, and we wish you all the best as you explore this conversation together. Thank you.